Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and it feels like I just made a MacBook Pro leak video only 2 weeks ago. That's because I did. But bear with me here because we have an even bigger leak this time, confirming some key details that we talked about in the last video, and also new details about the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro design, the return of MagSafe, and much more. But before we get into this video, I just wanted to give a quick plug to our sponsor for this video, me. It's January, so no one's really buying advertising, so I figured, why not throw some money at myself and sponsor my Twitter feed, where you can follow me for even more thoughts on all things Apple, technology, and batteries. Okay, I may regret that last one, but anyway, give me a follow at Gregory McFadden because I'm really trying to grow this Twitter account to 10,000 followers by the end of 2021, and I would be so grateful if you gave me a follow. But anyway, let's get back to the video. So this information is coming from two very well-trusted sources, Mark Gurman of Bloomberg and supply chain analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, and from separate news stories that were released practically within hours of each other, so this is as good as concrete information as we're going to get unless John Prosser leaks a video of the MacBook Pro for the entire Toilet Squad, but we'll have to do with these less entertaining sources for now. In Kuo's reporting, he is saying that the next MacBook Pro will be getting some major design changes, and the 13-inch model will be moving up to a bigger 14-inch display, I would assume with less bezels than the current model, and a new 16-inch MacBook Pro. Of course, we've heard about that before. Now, Kuo is also giving us some more details about how these models will look. And he says the new models will cancel the curvy design of existing models. The top and bottom parts will adopt a flat edge form factor that is similar to the design of the iPhone 12. Now this is interesting because if I look at the current MacBook Pros, they kind of already have a flat edge that looks similar to the iPhone 12. So it's hard to really parse out how different these MacBook Pros will look in terms of design, and Mark Gurman is saying that we should only expect minor design changes. However, one way I could read into this leak is that maybe the display panel would be getting a little bit thicker and a little bit boxier, and this could be to either fit in a touchscreen or more likely to fit in the technology for the mini LED display. We've heard about the mini LED display for a while now, and I covered it extensively in my last leak video, but both Gurman and Kuo say display improvements are coming to the MacBook Pro, with Gurman saying the new displays would be brighter and have higher contrast panels, which again I think would mean that this would be the first MacBook Pro that can show HDR content, which as a video editor, I would just be really excited for, as I would have a display that is not only able to view this HDR content, but also able to edit it as well. I should also say if the display panel is thicker, this could also mean a return to the glowing Apple logo, which we've heard a few scattered reports over the past few years that Apple was looking to bring back that design element into its future laptops. Furthermore, both sources are detailing another major change coming back to the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is the return of the beloved MagSafe charging port, which Apple got rid of when they released the 2016 version of the MacBook Pro. The MagSafe port, unlike the new MagSafe on the iPhone 12, was a magnetic charging cable that would easily disconnect from the MacBook Pro to prevent the charging cable from dragging the MacBook if you accidentally tripped or pulled the charging cable. It was an ingenious design choice, and a lot of other companies followed Apple's take here, releasing their own versions of safe magnetic chargers. According to Gurman, this version of MagSafe will not only bring back that magnetic charging port, and it would look very similar to that MagSafe port, but it would allow for faster charging than we are used to on the current USB-C ports of the MacBook Pros. And Gurman further clarified that on Twitter that Apple will not be removing any of the USB-C ports on the MacBook Pro to make room for this MagSafe port, It would just be an additional dedicated charging port on the new MacBook Pro. In my last video, I wondered if Apple would be bringing more ports to the new MacBook Pro. And while I didn't guess MagSafe, this change, it makes a lot of sense, especially with Apple resurrecting the branding for the MagSafe concept with the recent iPhone 12. MagSafe, again, it was a beloved port that people really liked, and it would also give the MacBook Pro a dedicated charging port. So even if they don't add any more ports, but they might, we'll get to that in a second, but it would just free up that one USB-C slot on the current MacBook Pro that you would have had to use for a charging port. So that would at least give you one more connection. The only downside I see from this change is if Apple will still allow us to use the USB-C ports for charging if we want to. One of the great things about using the USB-C ports for charging were that you could use any of the ports on the MacBook Pro to charge your laptop, meaning on the 4-port designed MacBook Pro models, you could charge from either side of the device. That was really convenient. Also, USB-C ports are so common now, you can charge your MacBook Pro with a bunch of different cables and charging bricks. So if Apple is bringing back MagSafe, as this leak indicates, I hope they would still give us the option to charge with USB-C. Now, the more interesting rumor here is that Kuo is saying that these new MacBook Pros will have more I/O and users will not need to purchase additional dongles. This sounds like Apple might be returning to more ports on the MacBook Pro, like USB-A, HDMI, or an SD card slot. Gurman doesn't mention this additional I/O returning to the computer, just MagSafe, but Kuo seems confident that we should see more ports and we won't need to purchase dongles. That basically means to me that there's gonna be USB-A or hopefully an SD card slot. I really don't know if Apple will bring those back, and Gurman has more of a solid track record when it comes to this stuff, and he's only saying MagSafe is returning. But again, Kuo does mention that MagSafe is returning as well as more ports. Hopefully, at least that means a return for the SD card slot, which I asked for in the last video. And when Apple giveth, Apple taketh away. As Gurman is reporting that Apple is testing versions of the upcoming MacBook Pro without the Touch Bar, while Kuo seems more definitive, saying that Apple is getting rid of the Touch Bar for the next generation of MacBook Pros. Again, this was a rumor I talked about in the last video, but now this is much more concrete, with 2 sources indicating that the Touch Bar might not appear on the next version of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. Again, this really does make a lot of sense to me, as after 4 years with the Touch Bar, it really hasn't caught on, or at least it really hasn't radically changed the way we use our laptops. There are some good uses for the Touch Bar, don't get me wrong, but not enough for it to warrant sticking around, especially because I think it is an expensive component to put into the laptop. And if it doesn't really add essential functionality to the device, especially when a lot of people don't even like using the Touch Bar because it's not really great for touch typing, and they would much prefer a dedicated row of physical function keys, there's really no reason for Apple to keep it around. It could also mean that touchscreens might be on their way to the Mac, as I indicated earlier, as I think macOS Big Sur looks a little bit more touch-friendly than the previous user interfaces for macOS, but we aren't hearing any rumors or leaks about touchscreen Macs in these new reports, so it doesn't seem like that would be a possibility, but who knows? Another interesting bit of information is that Kuo says the heat pipe design used by the current 16-inch MacBook Pro model will be coming to these future MacBook Pro designs. This makes sense to me, as the thermals in the 16-inch MacBook Pro are far better than the old design, but I also wonder, does the new MacBook Pro even need that advanced thermal design anymore? The new M1 chips are super power efficient, and the newest models of the entry-level MacBook Pro don't, if ever, heat up to any significance. Of course, these new MacBook Pros will use a next-generation version of Apple's in-house Mac processors, upgrade it with more cores and enhanced graphics, according to Gurman. So maybe these new processors will take up a little bit more energy when running at max load and might need more cooling than the M1 chip, but I guess it's better to have this advanced cooling rather than not have it. Again, I detailed this change to the M1X or M2 chip in my last video, but basically like Gurman states, it would be an even more powerful version of the M1 chip and could pack in as many as 16 high-performance cores. Besides CPU power though, this next chip will need to deliver on graphical power, especially for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which currently uses a dedicated graphics card from AMD. And if you're wondering if Apple will release another Intel version of the MacBook Pro, Kuo says that there will be no more Intel versions, and that makes a ton of sense to me, as the current M1 chip is basically already beating the highest end Intel processors available in the 16-inch MacBook Pro, so why should Apple stick around with Intel for another second? The M1 architecture is the future. I feel like Apple's going full steam ahead with that. As for when you can expect these new MacBook Pros, Gurman says Apple is aiming to have these released by the middle of the year, and that would line up perfectly with other rumors saying that these would be announced around WWDC 2021, which usually takes place in June. But so far, that's all we know about the next generation MacBook Pros, and honestly, I'm more excited than ever to see what Apple has up their sleeves for later this year. Hopefully, you're just as excited as I am, and if you are, let me know what leak you're most excited about for these new MacBook Pros in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give me a like. If you want to see more from my channel, well, make sure you're subscribed. Also, if you want to help the channel out in any way, make sure you check out some of the affiliate links in the description and go follow me over on my Twitter. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.